frightening cases of people who awoke in their graves. Imagine slowly opening your eyes in total darkness. The air is heavy and suffocating, your chest pressed down by the weight of wood and soil. You realize you are not in a bed, but in a coffin, several meters beneath the ground. This nightmare has haunted people for centuries. And for people in the past, it was not just fantasy. The risk of being buried alive was real. The modern case in Brazil. In 2013, a woman in Ferraz de Vasconcelos, a suburb of São Paulo, witnessed something unbelievable. When visiting her family's grave, she saw a man struggling up from the ground. He had freed his head and arms and was desperately clawing at the earth to get out. Rescue workers were called and dug him up alive. He survived, but later suffered severe psychological problems. To this day, no one knows how he was buried in the first place. But the incident was a reminder that the fear of waking in a grave does not only belong to history. Also in 2018 in Brazil, a case was reported where family and neighbors heard sounds from the grave where Rosângela Almeida dos Santos had been buried. Rumors spread that she had awoken after being declared dead, and the news shook the entire country. Octavia Hatcher, Kentucky, 1891. One of the most famous historical cases is Octavia Smith Hatcher from Kentucky. After her son died, she fell into depression and soon contracted a mysterious illness that left her in a coma. In the summer heat, she was buried quickly. A few days later, others infected began to regain consciousness. Her husband, in panic, ordered Octavia's body to be exhumed and found the inside of the coffin torn apart, her nails bloody, her face twisted in horror. She had awoken in her own grave and fought until the air ran out. Her monument still stands today, and many believe the disease was sleeping sickness caused by the tsetse fly. Essie Dunbar, South Carolina, 1915. 30-year-old Essie Dunbar suffered an epileptic seizure and was declared dead. When her sister arrived a day late for the funeral, she begged that the coffin be dug up for a final farewell. When the lid was opened, Essie sat up and smiled. Panic broke out, mourners fled in terror, believing she was a ghost. Essie had to climb out of the coffin and run after them to prove she was alive. She lived until 1962, but in people's eyes she was long known as the woman who returned from the grave. Alice Blunden, England, 1674. In Basingstoke, England, Alice Blunden drank a herbal decoction that put her into unconsciousness. She was declared dead and buried quickly, but children playing near her grave heard noises from below. When the coffin was opened, the inside was torn apart, her body bloody and her nails broken. She had awoken, but no one had heard her cries in time. Eleanor Markham, New York, 1894. In New York in 1894, Eleanor Markham was declared dead. Her body was placed in a coffin and transported to the cemetery. But during the journey, noises were heard from inside the lid. When the coffin was opened, she sat up, alive. The case was reported in contemporary newspapers, although some later claimed the story was exaggerated. But for the people present, the horror was real. Anna Hochwalt, USA, 1884. During her brother's wedding, Anna Hochwalt suddenly collapsed and was declared dead. She was buried immediately. When the body was later exhumed, she was found turned inside the coffin, her hair torn from her head and her nails worn down to the bone. Everything indicated that she had awoken underground and in desperation tore herself to death. Jenkins and Collins, North America, 1880s. The New York Times reported in 1885 about a man called Jenkins from Buncombe County, North Carolina. When his grave was opened, the body was lying face down at the bottom of the coffin, hair pulled out, the lid scratched. Everything indicated a desperate struggle. A year later, in 1886, the Times wrote about a girl named Collins in Woodstock, Ontario. When her grave was opened, the body was found on its knees, the burial shroud torn to pieces. Another sign that she had awoken in her own grave. Philomele Jonetter, France, 1867. A young woman in France contracted cholera and was declared dead. 16 hours later, she was buried. A gravedigger heard sounds from the ground, and when the coffin was opened, her eyelids were twitching and there was a faint heartbeat. She died shortly afterward, but not before struggling underground. The German shoemaker, 1822. In Germany in the 19th century, a shoemaker was buried who had been considered dead, despite the body showing no clear signs of death. When earth was thrown over the coffin, knocking sounds were heard from inside. He was dug up alive, but soon died of shock. Lady with the Ring, the legend. One of the most widespread folk tales is the Lady with the Ring. A woman was buried with a valuable ring. A grave robber tried to steal it, but when he could not remove it, he began cutting into her finger. Suddenly she screamed and awoke in the coffin. Whether the story is true is unclear, but it became a warning that lived on for generations. Swedish traces, alive in earth. In Sweden, no documented cases exist of mistaken death declarations leading to someone waking in their grave. But in old provincial laws there was the term kvicka jord, burial alive as punishment. Women who stole could be sentenced to be buried alive. Court records from the 1400s and 1500s mention this, including the maid Margit in 1476 and Katarina in 1488. In Swedish folk tradition, the fear of being buried alive lived on in other ways. That's why wakes were held, vigils over the body before burial, partly to ensure that the dead was truly dead. Rituals and stories of lingering souls reflected the same fear. What if the body had not fully left life? Fear becomes an industry. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the fear of waking in one's grave grew so strong that safety coffins were invented. They were equipped with air tubes, bells, strings, and even small flags that the buried person could pull. The term taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive, became common in medical texts and newspapers. Conclusion: today, it is difficult to imagine that a person could be buried alive. Modern medicine, death certificates, and embalming make the risk minimal. But the stories of Octavia Hatcher, Essie Dunbar, Alice Blunden, Anna Hockwalt, Jenkins and Collins, Philomele Jonetter, and many more remind us of a time when the boundary between life and death was blurry. And in Sweden, where laws once allowed people to be sentenced to be alive in earth, history too carries echoes of this nightmare. The nightmare of waking in a coffin, trapped in darkness, was for our ancestors no fantasy. It was reality. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and press like. It really helps the channel. See you next time.